very ambitious title of Simple Tips for Happy Lichens, or How to Save the World Through Lichen Conservation. Well, I like to think we're doing big things with our job, so why not? So I'm Brad Toms. I'm the wildlife biologist here at MTRI, and going on 16 years-ish coming this fall. And lichens have been one of my focal areas almost that whole time. My remote's not remote. Let's see. Says got lots of battery. Turn it off and on again. Why not? Space. All right, we're gonna have to have Justin maybe hit dance this live. Where's the where's the camera? Maybe not. Plugged in. Yeah, we moved the slides before in the beta test. Yeah. Yeah. Huh, well, maybe.
It's working.
Okay, it's working. There we go. That did it. All right, so MTRI's had a lichen project ongoing since 2000, at least 2008, when Crystal worked on it. And then after I started in 2010, took over some of the aspects of it. Started with boreal lichen monitoring, and then has grown to include lots of other species of risk lichens. And it's kind of go into more depth about all the stuff we collect as part of that project. And you can see there, boreal lichen. So start at the start. Most people have some kind of sense that we know a fair bit about the natural world, and very much is not true. So Western science has a pretty feeble grasp on how most ecosystems function, and except in the most kind of simple ecosystems. But especially very complex ecosystems, we're nowhere near kind of understanding them well enough to manage them correctly, or in a way that we fully understand what we're doing. For most places where we're doing things, altering the ecosystem, doing forestry, etc., we don't have adequate baseline data to make responsible decisions. So that's kind of the baseline of where we start. And with anything, for any topic, we at first have a lot of confidence in our ignorance of how much we know about it, and then as we learn more and more and more and more, we become very unconfident in how much we know, and then we kind of regain back up and kind of realize how much we don't know eventually about any given topic as we learn about it. And I'm hoping I'm kind of on this slope at the very least now, with lichens and lichen ecology and forest ecology, and studying lichens and mosses and insects and things like that really give you an appreciation for how little we know about not only the ecology but the species themselves, what's there, even the very, very basic inventory work for a lot of ecosystems. So even with lichens, where we, or even anything, birds, where we think we know a lot, like we lack a lot of the fundamental knowledge of their life cycles. So and this is especially true when we move into things like lichens and fungi and insects. We know even less about them than we do about, chordates and things like that, that have been studied a lot longer and are a bit more tangible for most people. So working with lichens has definitely given me a kind of insight into our arrogance of how complex these ecosystems really are, and what it would truly take to do kind of sustainable management of ecosystems and alterations in a way that's kind of respectful to all the taxa that are there. The kind of old knowledge for forest management of cut down trees or trees grow, cut down trees grow back is very much in a vacuum of kind of the entirety of the ecosystem, but also, ignorant of the cumulative effects that are ongoing as we kind of keep doing this over and over again, managing these places that we don't really understand. And when we're out there looking at a lot of these taxa, seeing complete collapses and even small clear cuts, even less than a hectare clear cuts, just complete collapse of all moss, all lichen, all insects, all fungi, dried and dead, gone within months. So, we're obviously doing better than when we're clear cutting 100, 200, 300 hectares at once, but still a lot of room for improvement. And, we're dealing with species that have evolved for thousands of years to be in that very place, right? These insects, these lichens, they've evolved and adapted to be there in that type. And when you alter it even a little bit, things can go haywire and complete collapse really quickly. So start with kind of the lichen basics. What are lichens? Lichens are composite organisms. They're made up of a photobiont, a photopartner, and a fungi. So the fungi is the structure of the lichen, and it provides the most of the structure that you see. And then within the interstices of the fungi, in between, there's usually a layer or several layers of the photobiont, either the algae, cyanobacteria, or both within that. So the photopartner provides food through photosynthesis, and the fungal partner provides a safe place to live. And David Richardson has an old paper on this, and it's really kind of, you can view it a lot of ways. You could view it as symbiosis. You could view it as, like the fungi kind of farming algae. You could view it as all sorts of different relationships, and it might, in different lichens, be different relationships in terms of how symbiotic they are and how much one is kind of utilizing the other more than, one's utilizing more than the other. So who's kind of involved in this? About 15,000 species of fungi can form lichens. So that's a fair bit just to start with. And just a handful of basidiumites can form lichens, and 25 genera of algae, some golden algae, one brown algae, and about 12 genera of cyanobacteria. So the number of species in each one of those genera of algae and cyanobacteria and everything is huge. So we're talking, thousands and thousands and thousands of combinations possible between lichen forming fungi and photopartners. So in a lot of the cases, when I talk about kind of the depth of our ignorance, we've not yet identified to the species level what we have in terms of the photopartners. And quite often now that they're starting to, investigate these things at a genetic level, we're starting to find that the genetics of the photopartner across spatial areas is incredibly complex. So, the photopartners in one part of Canada or even Nova Scotia could be different than the ones in another part of Canada, even though there's the same species. Species is kind of hard to define for cellular organisms. And a lot of these things can live independently as well. So they can live not as lichen or not within a lichen or not in a lichen relationship. So a lot of these fungi and a lot of these cyanobacteria can live independent lives and are taken in at the time of reproduction that the lichen forms, and were otherwise living wild up to So incredibly complex and stuff that we barely understand. Uh, This paper came out, it's probably 2 years ago now, but who knows the way my memory is now. It could have been 5 years ago, but it feels like 2 years ago. Paper came out that summarized where we are in the world of lichen biology, and it's stunning what we don't know as like a basis. Reading that paper was really eye-opening. Um, so lichens draw nutrients from the air, and they create energy through photosynthesis. They live on their host, but they don't draw from them. They can cause damage to the host just by being there and causing weathering, but they're not like actively doing damage, but the result of them being there and water and stuff collecting on rock or whatever can increase weathering, but they're not actively involved in really affecting their hosts very much at all. Um, So reproduction is, fairly complex. There's a bunch of different reproductive methods. And I try and when I take people out in the woods, try and start off with that because it's kind of easy to illustrate sometimes the differences when you have side by side on a tree, lichens that are sexually reproductive and lichens that are asexual. There's a variety of structures that they use to achieve reproduction. So some of it is by fragmentation. Some of it is by spores that need to be germinated. Um, and some use one strategy and some use multiple strategies. So classic, just like the lung lichen that everybody sees around, most of the time you see it as a asexual reproducer. But if you go down in somewhere where it's super happy, like in Shelburne County, or even some older forests in Keji, you'll see it has apothecia all over it, and it's doing sexual reproduction and vegetative both at the same time. So it's kind of has a preferred strategy, and then like if life is really good, a secondary strategy. And sometimes that can be really confusing when identifying something because you'd be looking for the lichen without apothecia and it has them, and you go, well, that really looks like this one, but usually doesn't have that. Usually doesn't have apothecia, but this one does. And so it can make using field identifiers sometimes not as reliable when growing conditions kind of allow them to alter their behavior. So some lichens have relationships with non-lichens, so liverworts, and they need liverworts like Borwell lichen. We know needs liverworts for the spores and the cyanobacteria to meet up in the water sacs of the Frulania. Presumably on old fur from the kind of data we have from Newfoundland and from Norway. And blue felt lichen was found in Spain to get its photopartner from a more common species. So it was relying on a species of Dendristocolon to be spreading photobionts into the environment, and then it would get its photobiont from that species. We don't have that species of Dendristocolon, and most of our Dendristocolons grow on rock, and we don't see a lot of them in the same habitat as blue felt lichen quite often. So we probably have some other lichen that we're not aware of that may or may not provide photobiont source for blue felt lichen. Again, we have like one example from somewhere in the world, and that's you kind of go, well, maybe we have that too. I don't know. But until somebody has the resources to kind of investigate it, it's a shot in the dark that there's probably some kind of relationship here as well. And so, a lot of these connections that we have between species, between wild living and cyanobacteria and things like that are kind of beyond even what we can imagine. So, but no doubt very complex because we often see how little it takes for, lichens to disappear, for them to suddenly become unhealthy. And there's obviously factors that have changed really quickly and caused them to decline. And so right now, kind of, the focus for lichens is on habitat continuity. and keeping, a habitat intact enough that lichens can be resilient and survive through change. So we noticed that a lot of our more vulnerable lichens that are sensitive to change are in forests that are of a high habitat continuity over time. So very little alteration over time and kind of natural background levels of uh, disturbance. That is, um, and that kind of allows them to persist. Um, and so there's probably that approach is probably also having benefits to all the other kind of lesser known taxa within those forest types as well. So lichens kind of can be an umbrella species to kind of protect all those things that we don't yet kind of know about and understand. Um, so more of the kind of basic lichen biology. Some are important nitrogen fixers, especially cyanolichens. So in Nova Scotia forests, we don't have a lot of trees that are nitrogen fixers. We have a lot of kind of plants and shrubs, and willows, poplars, and alders. But a lot of the cyanolichens are nitrogen fixers. So they, when they end up falling off the tree and into the forest floor, they're adding nitrogen from the atmosphere down into the soil. So they're definitely important that way. That's an important role that they have. Um, and so yeah, so healthy lichen communities contribute to healthy forest soils. You know, nitrogen depletion can be a problem, especially when kind of extractive things are taking resources that have grown in the forest and taking them out. You're deleting, nitrogen and carbon from the forest, and they kind of add back into it. So the other thing is like this is another thing of like when you start looking at lichens under microscopes, there's just so much going on. Like you see all these little organisms, and it's like a big party within the lichens. And so like on a tree, they're providing probably a lot of complex habitat for a lot of different things. Um, the more kind of structure you have on a tree with mosses and lichens and liverworts and things like that. So the kind of North American context, and some people are kind of, if they're not into lichens, are kind of surprised by this. But when we're talking about cyanolichens in Eastern North America, we are definitely one of the big hotspots. Um, some people say the Gaspé is also pretty snazzy, even though it's not on that map. Um, and the kind of lower Appalachians in the Smoky Mountains is one of the other big spots. Um, so we have about 350 species of macrolichen. That's kind of going up all the time as we're kind of discovering more new species every year. In the last few years have kind of been pretty productive for a lot of people. Alain Bellevaux and James Churchill and a few others have found quite a few new species to the province in some unique ecosystem types in kind of coastal peninsulas, the Digby County Clare area and Briar Island. Um, and so our project and the project as a whole within Nova Scotia involving all of our partners is one of the longest running lichen conservations in Canada and maybe even North America. Um, in the last few years, the kind of number of lichenologists and lichen enthusiasts in Nova Scotia have gone up dramatically. And there's a lot more people um, that are getting really enthusiastic about liking it and really good at identifying things and spend a lot of time out in the woods looking for them. So simple tips for happy lichens, right? So what makes a lichen happy? We'll get into them, but lichens contain multitudes, as you might have guessed. Uh, Different lichens have very different conditions under which they're happy. Some, are definitely are going to be happy right out there on the asphalt. There's and there's some that need deep dark forest and some need semi-barrens and some need bogs. But we're kind of as I hinted at, we're kind of learning all those things right now, the very basics about even our species, the wrist lichens. What are the true provincial ranges? What kind of host trees or substrates do they like? Um, and kind of regional differences we're finding too. We like we were never really looking for some of our lichens on oak, and then we just found the area down in Riversdale where like everything is on oak, and it's the only part of the province where all the salmon lichens are on oak. Um, and Jonathan Riley found all the blue felt lichen in Digby County growing on all sorts of tree types that we never, if people said, what do they grow on? We would have said maple and fir. That's what all we've ever found them on. And then he found them on all sorts of other things. So we're still figuring out the regional differences in all sorts of ways. Figuring out the long-term survivorship for some of these species now that they've been listed. Figuring out their threats now that there's more on the ground kind of people looking at what's going on, and hopefully with some people figuring out some of these symbiotic relationships. So there was definitely a lot of work done early on with boreal felt lichen to kind of look at all the boreal felt lichen we had, and we figured out things about, we have often species on fir, species of lichen on fir that are indicators, and things like cinnamon fern and species that use the same photobiont, like salted shell lichen, that are always kind of in the same area as indicators. And so we've kind of figured out those things for that one species, and now we're probably going to have to take some, time and figure out those same things for all the other species at risk we have now. And genetics, yeah, figuring out the genetics for a lot of this stuff as well is going to be some of that basic biological information, so that we kind of better understand the, what the species quote unquote of photobiont are, and how that relates to their wild populations and the health of those wild populations. Because if climate change causes declines in the kind of wild photobiont cyanobacteria populations, well, then that'll really affect the lichens. So simple tips. Simple tip number one: maintain stable global and local climate. Simple tip. And there'll probably be some other benefits to that, doing that. But if we can do that, we can reduce the chance of lichens becoming climate refugees, as we see shifts in moisture, but also probably as we see some of the host trees ranges change. We know from modeling that fir is expected to have a pretty dramatic shift in Nova Scotia. And so, we've had this thousands of years of fairly stable climate for the lichens to adapt and evolve in Nova Scotia. And then, we're heading towards, we're kind of around here and heading towards here pretty shortly. So all we have to do is that. And the challenges are that a lot of those changes may already be underway and may not be able to be reversed. So we might be into a bit more adaptive strategies very, very soon. Maintain a stable microclimate, a little easier. Still involves making sure that we kind of are maintaining ecosystems in a way that they are reflective of the kind of conditions that have been there for thousands and thousands of years. So whether that be an open barrens or a sphagnum bog or a forested wetland or a mature oak forest, that stable microclimate is going to be beneficial to all the organisms. And we've seen that through, DNR's kind of literature review that they did, where like when you take out certain amount of forest cover, you see taxa collapse, especially in those things like insects and mosses and things like that, and lichens. So the challenge to that is that there's natural disturbances, wind throw, and as we're seeing right now, fire, that can cause complete or near collapse of multiple taxa that we can't control. But we do have types of disturbance that we do have form control over. So as we kind of learn more and more about these complexities of maintaining the stable microclimate in these ecosystems, we're probably going to have to adapt what we're doing on the landscape a lot more if we're not going to just accept that all these taxa are going to collapse every time we take out some trees. Maintain a diversity of natural ecosystem types. Well, it's easier than solving global climate change, but still challenging. But this will safeguard against the loss of all these, inconspicuous and cryptic species and taxa, and help maintain landscape connectivity. It hasn't been something that we're really good at in Nova Scotia in terms of protected areas planning. There are some kind of representative examples in different protected areas, but ensuring that we have good percentages of different ecosystem types within all the protected areas through the province isn't something that's like really being done as strategically as it is in other places. Definitely, there's lots of examples out there where they've said, here's our different ecosystem types, and here's the percentages we currently have protected, and we need to do better here, and we're kind of oversaturated here. Like in Ontario, they went kind of like, we've got enough kind of mature pine forests in the boreal. We can, focus on things that are a bit rare, like albars and, floodplains and things like that. So, yeah. So also maintain a diversity of natural ecosystem types. This is the same thing as before. This is just more points under that. So this is from Scientific Reports in 2017. This is the taxonomic bias in biodiversity data. And I like to show this once in a while to show kind of where there's an overabundance of data relative to how many species there are versus an less sightings compared to how many species there are. So lichens is among those, but there's lots of other things in there: fungi, gastropods, arachnids, insects. And so this is probably where we're having things go extinct without us even knowing. We're like fighting conservation battles to keep things from going extinct here, but things are here probably disappearing before we even describe them. So definitely, if we have a representative bunch of ecosystem types within our protected areas, it will somewhat safeguard against this kind of bias in conservation effort. So that in the future, when we kind of maybe hopefully balance things out a bit more, get a lot more experts roaming around the woods in all these other things, that maybe will have preserved some of them within protected areas. So again, things acting as kind of an umbrella. So maintaining healthy biodiverse forests. So this is only relevant to forest dwelling lichens, obviously, but for a lot of where we're fighting a conservation battles for cyano-lichens, this is where it is. They're all kind of in forested ecosystems, so this is very kind of relevant to what we're doing in conservation right now for lichens. So if we maintain healthy biodiverse forests, we'll increase the resilience against changes for lichens, but also other taxa. And we'll have reduced chances of extinction and extirpation locally. Same kind of idea. But adapting industrial forestry into truly ecological forestry that respects all taxa and the long-term effects is going to be challenging. Again, we said we're doing better after the Leahy report, but some of the kind of cut types that seem pretty exciting as maybe being a bit better. On the ground seem pretty much the same effect, just smaller. The loss is still there. It's just it's a little circle where the guy sat there and spun the harvester around. But it's a circle with no life or very little life in it. Compared to now, it makes it very stark now because you can stand in the forest that is completely intact and look out 10 meters and go, that's all burned and gone. And this is what the forest looked like. And it really makes it much more stark than when you're kind of traveling from a forest into a big clear cut and you were like, yeah, this is bad, but like it's really stark when you're just like looking from here to there. Maybe I could have found a place to do that in the past, but it's been more startling. Ensure proper substrates are available. So this is definitely something that's hopefully through the SMP buffers that are available for lichens on crownland, that this is something that we can do. If those same habitat types that they need are within the buffers, then we'll be maintaining the appropriate substrates that they need to reproduce or live on or whatever. It allows for colonization, allows for adaptation to changes, both natural and unnatural. But as I said, we don't yet know all those substrates for all the species, and things that we thought even 5 years ago were like, whatever, that's not going to ever have a species of risk lichen on it. Now we're like, yeah, okay. Now we have to check every upland oak and every upland poplar, and to truly make sure that we're not going to mow down a bunch of species at risk. So, and as before, natural disturbances are out of our control. That's a challenge there. The other one is eliminate invasive species. Slugs, deer, insects, invasive fungi, deer. I said deer there twice intentionally. Reducing grazing on native species of lichen by slugs. The benefits of doing this, especially with slugs, reduce competition with native slugs, which we don't yet know kind of what the effects of all these invasive slugs that we have are on the native slug species, but we definitely know that the invasive slugs are eating a lot of our cyanolichens, and especially Borophylla, they seem to have a particular appetite for it. So the lichens have adapted over thousands of years to the native grazers, the native insects and slugs. They probably expect a certain level of grazing and can withstand it, or have developed chemical defenses. I'm sure that battle's kind of been ongoing, but introducing a kind of huge slug species that can just climb up trees and start grazing, those are the guys. They can really devastate things really quick, and not only for our endangered lichens. We see our lung lichens and stuff in some places are just completely devastated by slugs, and the surfaces are all grazed right off. So one of the challenges is eggs are easily moved on mud. So forestry equipment's probably a vector. It's something we don't really know yet, but we see a harvest happen, and then we see slugs come in and eat a bunch of Borophylla. So it's kind of it's a little bit of correlation at this point, but that work's being done by the Nova Scotia Museum, Sean Hoyne's group there. So we'll have a lot more out on that soon. And they've got a lot of stuff going on there right now. And MTRI is working with them on deploying copper on Borophylla trees. And I don't know the number right now, but it's dozens and dozens of trees, of the remaining Borophylla trees, have copper on them, and some of them are responding well, which that might be later in the presentation as well. But so what makes a lichen happy is very individualistic. As I said before, some want to be in hot, open habitats, some want to be in dry habitats, and would do really poorly in wet forests and things like that. So most of our species at risk lichen are in a mature climax forest habitat type. And when we disturb mature climax forests, we often see lichens desiccate and die off. So climax forest is not necessarily old growth, but it is old and it's continuous. So as I said before, forest continuity is kind of the term some of us have been using to describe these forests, is that they've been that habitat type continuously for a long time. The trees in them might not get particularly old, but they are the thing that they're going to be until some kind of disturbance kind of happens. They're at their climax stage. So we have climax red maple forests, fir forests, floodplains, red maple floodplains, oak forests, coastal black spruce. There's lots of things that can be very old, continuous forests, and climax forests are important, but are also becoming increasingly rare in the landscape in Nova Scotia because of how we've kind of managed things in the past. So the species of risk lichen that we have right now currently, the ones in yellow are what we have listed under the Species of Risk Act federally. This column over here is what listed provincially, and two are pending minister approval at the federal level: the white rim shingle lichen and the scaly fringe lichen, which have been listed by COSEWIC for a few years now in both those cases. So hopefully that pending designation changes pretty soon. But we've got kind of our listed lichens: black foam, blue felt, borophyll lichen, water fan, frosted glass whiskers, scaly fringe, foliars, white rim shingle lichen, and wrinkle shingle lichen. And then we've kind of got some that are of conservation concern, and that these are a part of the provincial SMP. They get a buffer if they're found, but they're not listed under either provincial or federal legislation. They're just particularly rare, and they're considered that rare enough that if you find them, should protect around them. So Hibernia jellyskin, which is now a IUCN red listed species, thanks to Francis's work on that, and Parmelia yellow which is really kind of diminutive and hard to find Santa lichen, but often find it in kind of the same places where borophyll lichen is. There's very few locations of it in the province. And stick to limbata, which we're down to only a few host trees of that. There was only ever between 6 and 10 host trees known, and a bunch of those have disappeared. So we're kind of down to 3 or 4 host trees in the whole province. And it's kind of not, we don't know a whole lot about it. And we're the only place on the eastern seaboard with it. That's a West Coast species. It's there's a fair bit of it up and down the whole West Coast of North America, and we have these locations in Nova Scotia that are hanging on. And then we have one that used to be listed, ghost antler lichen, which I think at some point should probably have a push to be relisted provincially, because it was delisted because of New Brunswick in the kind of national context, that there's a lot in New Brunswick, but our population in Nova Scotia is actually still very small, and it's still probably pretty habitat limited as far as we can tell, but probably needs an assessment, provincial assessment on that someday. So MTRI's lichen project, I'll go through quickly what we're kind of doing. And so it's continuing to monitor the borophyll lichen. And every once in a while I get up to one of the sites in Guestwick, but mostly it's Chris Pepper, who's out looking at all the sites across Guysborough, Halifax, Richmond, and Cape Breton counties. And for that, monitoring the health of all those lichens, helping to put out copper with the museum, Nova Scotia Museum project. And visiting at this point, we're back to where we could probably visit all the sites every year. When there was a couple hundred sites, we've had kind of split up visiting them over several years, and now there's less than 100. We'll probably get to the point of visiting them all every year. Um, for the next while, as long as we keep getting. But we've also started expanding our monitoring to other species. So we've done a prioritization exercise with all the lichen species at risk, and prioritized them based on some things that I'll show in a second, and then gone out and done monitoring of them 10, 15, sometimes 20 years after they were initially found, in the early days of the project. And we've done some work on the woodlot owner projects that have sand lichens down in Shelburne County, and try and contribute to the larger landscape level planning that benefits lichen species at risk. We have especially lots of nature trust and nature conservancy properties that are geared towards lichens, and have big kind of bunches of properties together that are in really important lichen areas. We have some provincial protected areas where lichens were a big reason for listing them. Some of them we've been lucky enough they're even named, like Ghost Antler Nature Reserve and things like that. So kind of neat to have lichens kind of be at the forefront of some of those reasons for properties getting protected. And we also are trying to always increase awareness of lichens in general, and educate on what's going on, and do mentoring with aspiring lichenologists. So a few years ago, we did a threats assessment. And I always just bring this up because it was in the height of kind of post-COVID stuff, and I always like to mention it in case somebody's like, "Hey, that sounds like something that'd be interesting." It took a lot of work, and it's pretty interesting. But we use satellite image to look at all the buffers, the SMP buffers for all the at-risk lichen species, and look at whether those are all intact or not, and what the landscape level threats were for each of the lichens, how often they're in protected areas, what the land ownership types are, and conservation kind of challenges and opportunities for each species. It's kind of a nice thing to breeze through and get ideas from, hopefully, based on all the data we kind of had up to that point. As I said, with boreal felt lichen, you can't really see underneath in here, but online, I'm sure you can see this line going down, and I think goes to 83 there. So we're kind of way back to this kind of level when I first started. We were kind of on our way up, and all these have kind of disappeared, and hitting a lot of buttons, and and yeah, we're back down into the kind of scary territory where we're going to have to really start thinking about what we're doing for conservation, and action, things that are a bit more action oriented instead of just documenting an extinction, which is kind of currently what we're doing. And we're also, so one of the interesting changes has been that because of the changes to the provincial harvest guides, forested wetlands aren't in the harvest guides anymore. So that means SMP searches are less and less often overlapping with boreal felt lichen habitat. And I think that's one of the reasons we're not finding a lot of new sites over the past few years. It's just sending us more often into places where it's not likely to have boreal felt lichen. So we're gonna have to fix that with freestyle searches. And tell Chris, just go where you think it's going to be good, and try and find some new boreal felt lichen. So as part of the project, we also maintain our lichen databases. So we have boreal felt lichen database and a SAR lichen database, and both of those have monitoring data within them, recorded for all the species of risk lichens. So we, in both of these, record grazing, necrosis, host tree, lichen health, number of thalli. There's fields for almost anything that we have recorded in the past. We have kind of a basic bunch of information we gather every time, but if some people feel more ambitious and want to measure them and do things like that, it's all available in there as to fill in. And so we have like 534 bone belt lichen records and 2,700 monitoring records in association with those, and just under 300 foliars records. And we've done a lot less monitoring of foliars. 168 monitoring records. And then for the big lichen database of all the non Areoderma lichens, 8,263 lichen records, and at this point 2,090 monitoring records associated with those. And so wait a second, that's not what I want. We also maintain a database of search effort. So GPS, every time we're out doing a lichen search, or any of our partners are, everybody's encouraged to turn their GPS on, collect a track while they're doing a lichen search, and contribute it to the database. And so we maintain this file among all the partners, and then it's available. So if number one, we can do a desktop exercise with it, which is required under the SMP. So pull up this file and see whether a harvest block has had a lichenologist go through it before. And if it has, then we make sure we don't duplicate effort. So it's really good that way. I'd say about anywhere between a quarter and a half of jobs that are sent to us from the companies have had a lichenologist go through them already. In every or at least in all of them or some of them. So and when all the polygons have already been covered, then it passes the desktop exercise and we don't have to go revisit it. And in the past that was a problem. Places, Tom and Chris would show up and be like, we've been here before, kind of thing. They've sent us back in here. So good not to duplicate effort with limited conservation. But also, reveals places where we have huge gaps in effort in Cape Breton and Pictou County, Antigonish County, Cumberland, Colchester, parts of Annapolis, Kings, the Tobiatic. So the other thing, so yeah, as I said, we do S&P searches. So special management practice that's required when the boreal felt lichen habitat model overlaps with a harvest, and hopefully sometime soon have some other triggers as well for requiring lichen surveys, because the boreal felt lichen model is only along the Atlantic coast, and now we know, in lots of other parts of the province, there's lots of endangered Santa lichens that are likely to be cut down if there's not a survey done before cutting happens. And so the past few years, we've had about 30 blocks a year for Port Hawkesbury, and a dozen or less or more. Probably about this year's probably so far 5, same for 2025 for West Forth. We also do S&P surveys and desktop exercises for other people. If people are doing a right of way across provincial land, things like that, we'll do that. So we're also so we've developed a lichen monitoring plan and protocol. We're always kind of updating it as a part of the project and integrating new methods that people are developing. So when Alain or Sean or James are having something new going on, and we can hopefully integrate the methods that they have into the monitoring plan and protocol. And survivorship monitoring. So this is the big kind of crux of the current project, is that we've prioritized our 8,000, well, it's not that many, I guess, from that database of 8,000, the SAR lichens, which, there's 1,800 to 2,000 locations of the species at risk lichen, and we've prioritized those to give them a score from 0 to 4, 0 being the highest priority, I think. Maybe not, maybe 0. 10 years and lost one score. Yeah, that's probably right. So the lower numbers, the zeros, are the highest priority. And so that's based on how long it's been since they have last been monitored, or since they were first found. Whether there's a visible impact within the SMP buffer, and whether it's in a protected area. And then we're trying to go out and monitor as many of those as possible before March 31st of this year, and write a great big old report on all those species and how the survivorship effects look. And that'll be our first glimpse, really, at how all those species are doing, since, other than their COSEWIC report, since they were COSEWIC listed. And as I kind of said, it's really a good time to be into lichens, because there's a lot of stuff. Not only because there's a lot of people, but because there's a lot of people in a lot of places, and the kind of purview of lichenologists has expanded greatly within the province. And so we're learning things about places. Now we just need to get some lichenologists up in Pictou County, and we need to find somebody who's got that right obsession to go out and start looking. But yeah, we're learning a lot about, as I said, all the different new host trees, new habitat types, things like that. It's excellent to be a part of. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
You said like the fungi and the cyanobacteria can live like separately.
Mhm.
So if like the species of lichen were to become extinct, but the two, like the fungi and the cyanobacteria, are still occurring separately, could it theoretically come back from extinction if they somehow form it up again?
So theoretically, yes, because the genetic components are within each of them to allow them to be lichenized and form that relationship. So as long as they're the exact same species
Right.
of fungi and photopartner that they were, and not like a slight variant that doesn't have the right genetics to form the lichen partnership, then theoretically, yes. So they that's one of the like things they've never been able to do, is take fungi and take photopartner, put them together, and have them form a lichen in front of their eyes. They've never been able to do that. So like, yeah. You can't do it. They haven't been able to do it in a lab yet, but in theory, yes. That one got me when I read that paper. I was like, really? Somebody's done that yet? They tried. They tried real hard.
Nobody has come up with a question online either,
Okay,
specifically asked.
means I was thorough,
It does.
right?
Well, once going twice. All right, well, thank you, Brad. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone online, and we'll let you go. Thanks for joining us.